Welcome back. In this video we will cover the Model View Controller design pattern. We will cover Apple's view on MVC, then we will build out our model along with our model controller. The Model View Controller is a way to keep our applications organized. It will assign different pieces of our application into three roles: a model, a view, and a controller. A controller is not to be confused with a view controller. A controller, as seen in this diagram here, is simply there to update our model, which will hold our data, and update our view, which will display the data to the user. So a view controller, in essence, is really just a view. It also holds other views that the user can interact with. And then when those views are changed, it goes back to our controller object, which will then update our model. And then if we are to store this in a database or on the device, that controller will take care of that as well. Back in our project, let's create our model and model controller. We click on Journal, and right-click, we will create a new group called Data. I'm going to drag that down below our app delegate just to keep things organized. With data selected, we can hit Command-N and create a new Swift file. We will create this entry, because this will model our entry object. And an entry will store our color, our tag, our title, and our body. So to do that, we will import UIKit, and we are going to import UIKit because we are going to be using UI color to store the color. And then we can create a struct of entry, and we said we will have properties of title, and that will be a string. Body, which will also be a string. A tag, which will also be a string. We will hold a color, which will be a UI color. We will need a way to update these properties. So if you remember, we don't need an initializer because a struct automatically gives us an initializer. But we do need a way to update these properties. So we can say func update. And then we want to be able to update each property. So for the parameters, we can take in a title of string. We will make that string an optional and set that to nil. We'll do the same thing with body. Have a string optional equal to nil. We will have a color and also a tag. So let's start with a tag. Keep the same order that we have in our property list. And a color, which will be a UI color equals nil. Now, we can call this update method with no properties, and it won't update anything. But if we just want to update one property, say the title, we can do so without having to have a separate update method for title, a separate update method for body, a separate update method for tag, and color. And to do that, we can just unwrap whichever property we are dealing with. So in this case, we will unwrap title. And if title exists, we can set the self.title equal to the title in the parameter list for our function because it exists. If it doesn't exist, it will just skip over this property altogether. And you notice we get this compiler error saying cannot assign property to self is immutable. That's because since we are inside of a struct and we are trying to modify one of the properties, we have to make this a mutating function. So now we want to unwrap all of the other values and say if let body equals body, self.body equals body, if let custom color, this is just color, equals color, then self.color equals color, and we want to do the same thing with tag, and we will put that above color. So if let tag equals tag, self.tag equals tag. So this will allow us to update these properties if we need to change them. For instance, if in our list we go ahead and change it, we can call this update method and have the property changed. So now let's create our model controller. So we will say entry controller dot Swift, and we will make this a class. And we're going to make this a class because we need a reference type to be able to always have access to the same array, and that array will hold our entries, and we want access to that same array of entries every time that we access this class. So we're going to want a var of entries that is an array of entry, and that's the data type that we just created. We also want to hold a var of tags, and this is just going to be an array of string, and this will be a computed property that will return an array of tags. For now, we will just return empty string, and we will go over that shortly. We're just return an empty array, actually. One other property we're going to have is a shared property, and it's going to be a static let, and this static is just going to say that this property is being initialized once, and every time we access this property, it's going to have the same value. It's not going to be a new value. So we can say let shared equals entry controller, and here we are initializing our entry controller class, or entry controller object. So we're going to hold a reference to this entry controller that will never be changed because it's initialized once and only once. So now whenever we access this property, instead of it creating a new entry controller, it's just accessing the same entry controller that we initialized the first time we called this shared property. So if you remember from the discussion of model view controller, the purpose of this controller is to be able to update our data model and display that data model to our views. So this is called CRUD, and it's going to have our create entry, our read or retrieve entry, our update entry, and delete entry. So let's start with creating an entry. We say func create entry. We want to create an entry with a title of string, a body of string, a tag of string, and we'll make this optional and set it to nil because it might not have a tag. And then we want a color of UI color. So inside of this method, we want to create the entry. And we can say let entry equals an entry object, and we have our initializer here. And this will take in a title, which we already have in our parameter list, a body from our parameter list, a tag, and then if the tag is nil, we want to make that untagged. And the reason is because our tags are going to be section headers in our list view, and we don't just want to have a blank tag, we want it to say untagged if we never assigned it a tag, or a tag of the tag that we assigned it. And for the color, we will pass in color. And notice we're getting this compiler error, and that's because we did not import UIKit to be able to use UI color. So at import foundation, we will replace that with UI. Next, we want to be able to retrieve an entry. Let's take a look at this. Parameter requires an explicit type. And that's because I forgot a colon. So we created the entry, and we want to also save this entry and append it to our entries array here. So we will say entries.append, and we will append our entries, or just our single entry that we just created. And then here we are going to want to save this, but we won't cover saving until one of the last sections in the course. So for now, let's worry about retrieving an entry. We will create a method called getEntry at indexPath, and this will be of an index path, and it's going to return an entry to us. In this getEntry, we're going to need to be able to first get which tag we are working on, and we're going to get this from our tags array, and the tag that we were working on will be based off of the index path, and it will be based off of the section of the index path. And then our entries, we will call this method getEntries with tag, and we will create this method, and then we will be able to return the entry from our entries that we just created based off of the index path.row. So let's take a second to go through this. So an index path has a section of X and a row of Y. And depending where it is, if we have a section which is X and then a row which is Y, depending on those values, will get us what we need. So our sections of X will be all of our tags, and then our row of Y will be all of our entries. So we first have to get which tags we have, and if we just created one entry with no tag, the only tag we have will be untagged, and then it will see that as a section, and then we will get the entries from that section using this method that we are going to create next. And then we will get all the entries based off of the untagged, and then we will get the row, in this case all of our Y's, based off the indexPath.row, and we will get that entry out of our entries array. So let's create our getEntries with tag, which will return an array of entry. And here we just want to return our entries, and we want to filter our entries based off of the tag that is passed into this getEntries with tag. So if we passed in untagged here, we will loop through all of our entries and filter for our entry.tag equals the tag that we pass in. So if we passed in untag, and we already have an entry that has a title of first entry and a tag of nil or no tag, that will be displayed as untagged, which will be passed into this parameter list here for getEntries. It will see that they were equal to each other and return to us an array of that single entry. And then if we were to get entry at section 00, we will be able to get that entry that is created. So now we want to create a new method called updateEntry, which passes in an entry, a title, a body, a tag, and a color. And then we want to get the index of our entries.indexOf, and we want to check for the entry that's being passed in. And if that doesn't exist, we will just return out of here because there's nothing to update. But if that does exist, we want to grab our entries based off of that index from our entries array and change the title. We will want to change the body. We will want to change the tag. If no tag exists, we want to make it untagged, and we will want to change the color. And then we will want to save as well once we implement that. But notice we cannot invoke this index because we need to first make entry conform to an equatable protocol so that we can see if they are equal to each other. Because right now the compiler doesn't know if one entry equals another entry. So in our entry file, we want to go to the bottom and create an extension of entry and a colon to say that we want to conform to equatable. And then we want to say static func equals equals. We have a left-hand side that's of type entry and a right-hand side that is of type entry. And then we return a bool. So basically we're seeing if the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side and to return true or false. So we will return the value of our left-hand side dot title equals equals to our right-hand side dot title. And we also want left-hand side dot body be equal to the right-hand side dot body. We also want left-hand side dot tag be equal to the right-hand side dot tag. And the left-hand side dot color be equal to the right-hand side dot color. If all of those are true, we will get return value of true. If any one of those is false, we will get a return value of false. So once we conform to equatable and we hit Command B to build, that compiler error goes away. The last method that we have to implement is our delete entry method, which will take in an entry. Then we can do the same thing. We can check for our index, and we will look for the index of the entry we were looking for, else return. So if we can find that entry in our entries array, then we can remove it at the index that we unwrap. And then we will also want to save here. So now we have our model completed and our controller completed. And in the next videos, we will look at how we can hook some of this up. In the next video, we will explore actions and outlets. See you then.